this is our alerts, and they're all fake alerts here, by the way. It's not very meaningful. But, and we have to be careful of that because one time we sent out fake alerts that actually ended up going out on the network, and it caused a lot of upset. So we make them real obvious that they are fake. But here's just a list, your usual index, and then, more for doing a show on each of these.
If you would explain what an alert is.
Yes, an alert is this is the FIN system. It's Health
Alert Network.
Health Alert Network, and a local health official, whether he's in El Paso or something like that, if he has a situation that he needs to alert other people of capacities, either in the same jurisdiction or out of jurisdiction throughout the entire state, he can send out, compose this alert, build out the audience, and then send this alert out. You can even specify it to require an acknowledge, and it records the acknowledge of each party and keeps a record of that statistics. Next
This is the web app.
This is the way it looks as a web site, and so here's a problem. One of the problems is Apple. Why I say that is that I'll get to that to a point. But the point, first of all, is we got a Rails app, and they require, the state conform to the RESTful. We do post. Well, which I'll point out to later on is that to get a post through your browser to the server and back has some problems with that. And it's referred to as cross-origin resource sharing, and I'll get into that in a moment. But just remember that these your Rails actions require a post. So another requirement that we had was that we need to access our website by a login, because we don't want the public going out and looking at our health alerts that may not be appropriate. We show a list. We're going to show a list of the latest alerts. And also another criteria that we realized was healthy was to be able to, if you're in an area, you might want to find out who are officials in your area, or if you might be traveling out, you're on your iPhone or so, and you want to find out who's in your area. So you can do a personnel directory search. And then another criteria was that this was to be delivered in the AppStore. This is our code base. It is open source, right on GitHub.
For the iPhone application itself.
For the iPhone site, the client site. So our objective, obviously this doesn't look the same as the other list, we don't have as much visual real estate, but it's trimmed down to the minimum requirements of showing. And you'll notice that this is a little bit different colored. These type alerts required action on the part of the viewer, the owner of the phone, who's logged in. And we'll go into that later, is the people search. And that's just a high-level survey of the persons, and then you can click on them. In both cases, you can click on this and you get the full detail, click on this and you get the full detail. And in this one here, you do an acknowledge, and that's how it gets recorded back. Thanks. So, Objective-C, very popular language. Not so really. I guess it was designed in 1980, in the 80s. The learning curve on it is, I went to the class, forgive me, but Austin Community College, and I left the class. And 94% of the students left the class. The environment learning curve, what I mean by that is a large number of APIs. Apple's APIs to get to this, to get to that, to build this, to build a spinning wheel, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's not only the language, but the APIs. And then the real killer is memory management. Every object, every instance variable has to be managed by memory. And you have to make sure any one of those breaks, your app's dead. So another thing we said, well, why are we writing a client app for what is already a web-enabled site? So along comes alternatives, and one of them, Accelerator, very good product. I think you mentioned some recent news about them recently. Roads is another. These are like frameworks that lay into the phone, and then you can do your HTML, JavaScript, CSS on top of them. Roads is actually Ruby-based. It might be interesting to you, but it doesn't seem like it's taking a lot of traction. It doesn't seem like it's getting a lot of traction. PhoneGap was our choice, because it did put us into technologies that we're familiar with, JavaScript, CSS, HTML5. And to take along with the PhoneGap framework, we used a look and feel package called jQtouch. Uses obviously the jQuery. And, or thank you, but no thank you, roll your own. The PhoneGap, as we chose it, one of the sticklers is that it runs as a local web server. Well, okay, cool. But now what that introduces you is you got code here that you're filling out these pages, and you're issuing requests to the server, the Rails server, and the browser says, hey, wait a second, you can't do that because that's cross-scripting. So there's a new model, a security model, and I'll get into that in a minute. It's called CORS, and there's a spec on that, cross-origin resource sharing. And that's how we eventually got there. Another thing that we were pursuing that PhoneGap gave us is that the display would remove the title bar and the status and everything, made it look like a true app, a true phone app. And likewise, of course, another additional features. This all comes through the new HTML5 with the WebKit. Is the various storage memory, and we use session, of course, to hang on to a cookie, which I'll bring up to you in a moment. Access to iPhone resources. Essentially, PhoneGap is a framework. It's all C code, native Objective-C, but then it has all these hooks with a JavaScript library that you can get into all these, and it's gives you access to most of the resources and highly extendable. You can follow, their examples, and you can go on and you can add very easily to more resources you want to. Thanks. So, before we bust into this thing, we wanted to have some confidence that we were going to be successful. We looked at what Apple says. Apple mostly says we'll reject it, regardless of what it is. But then we found a website, Tumblr, which people, thankfully, who have submitted and gotten rejections, and they go to this site and they add in their comments about it. So it creates a real good list, a reality of what's going to succeed and not. Top number one winner is if you don't have good air handling on your network, you're going to bomb out. You're not going to get even the first base with Apple. What they expect is that, well, they have, I'll go into it a little later, but there's an API, it's called reachability. definitely want to utilize that. Another thing too, you're talking about some cases where you're over 3G and 3G or G3, kind of 3. And it's slow. We've had to extend time substantially, but so we're pushing ourselves further and further into what we get to essentially is JSON. Another requirement is no desktop and widget environment. You cannot make it look like something else. And another issue was no major UI elements, meaning you cannot download pages and show your page. It's basically you have to communicate with data, and JSON is the most popular, of course. And that was the website that was on there that had those entries. So, Rails integration. For us, we using JSON, we knew that we had to work on the search and the alerts controller. And another stunning thing for me, because I'm so Rails concentric, that all of a sudden I realized, I can't just serve up pages and expect them to fill them out because I don't have the data that the page would have been filled out with, like presets for drop downs and things like that and everything. So to me that was earth-shattering. So our first attempt was JSON-P. Was essentially JSON with that can be data or code. Cool. But several things came up to that. One is that leaves you wide open to security issues because anybody can inject JavaScript into and your site becomes something totally different. Next, your local phone app. Next was our concern with that openness. You're going to use the eval statement of JavaScript. That all of a sudden that you could download whatever you chose, and we considered. Apple doesn't tell you what you can't do; they just tell you when what you did they didn't like, they reject. So we anticipated that having an eval JavaScript statement of the JSON-P would put us possibly as a candidate for rejection. We therefore trying JSON-P attempt to see if it would work. Anyhow, we wrote a rack hack that essentially, you can go to the next page, just to illustrate the point. The trick of this whole rack is the middleware between Rails and little HTML, HTTP. We faked out Rails if it was a callback JSON-P and it was a GET request. We made it into a post. So the reason for that is that GETs flow right on through, and they have no trouble with the cross-origin resource sharing, no problem whatsoever. As soon as you shoot a post at it, it's going to send you off, and you're going to have to go through this process. I'll show in the future. It's called pre-flighted options.
Yeah, and JSON-P doesn't even support posting with jQuery, which is basically why we had to do this little hack.
Additional problem. So next one. So here's the specs, and of course it's their formal website that has the current version of that. And being that we were going to require a login, we needed to, Rails handles this with a session token. So we capture a token through our first session connection, and then we preserve that in a local store, and we use that through all the following requests.
One thing I'd like to point out is that you don't have to run stuff off your local web server with PhoneGap, you could make it go to a website. But we felt that that just potentially created a dependency that Apple could say, well, then you could just change, you know, what your app is doing. So we wanted to make sure that everything was contained in the local project, that nothing was required from the server other than data.
As a proxy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. Good point to bring up. In that spec, it requires these various headers to be set up. And then if it's a post, it requires also these specific things in these headers to what we'll get into as a pre-flighted request. Next one. Oh, by the way, real trouble here. It threw us astray a long period of time because Safari, which is Apple's brother, of course, and Chrome, which is the WebKit, uses the WebKit inspector, absolutely makes options totally opaque. You don't even know they exist. And so you'll run into this problem, you won't even know you have a problem, other than it won't work. So we reverted, of course, to the trusty old Firebug. And as you can see, the sequence here, we initially did a post on this session, you know, password, username, and the browser says, oh, I got to send out an options request, and it does. And so I'll show you in a moment the code that supports that. And then these are just following the same sequence, post, before, give, and so on and so forth. So here's a client-side login. The starts out with a post, and we're capturing a cookie so that we can use this cookie token in the future connections, so it recognizes the session. And that's basically all I wanted to point out here. It is a post. And the next page will
the long timeout.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, this was extremely lengthened over what the default was. What was it, 2,000 or something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah, some.
Everything was giving up because of the 3G.
Yeah, and you, you know, in this kind of environment, all you do is it just doesn't work. So, and we'll bring out to why without getting the reachability API working initially and everything, we didn't know. We had failures. We had no clue what was. So it's definitely a plus. That request is going to be seen by your Rails server, and it's going to hit with a session, and it's going to have a request that's going to be sent by the browser, and so you have to support this method and options. So this is added into your routes for that particular path. Then in our controller for the session, we'd get this token. We'd go to Ethan hunted all over heck and found this particular code to build ourselves pragmatically the token, and then we pushed it out on this from this request once person logged in properly and passed that.
But you have to be careful with this because this was dug out of the internals of Action Pack and squashed together so that we didn't have to make a bunch of calls. So if Rails changes this in any future versions, you'll need to make sure you make the necessary adjustments. So it's a little fragile in that sense, but this is what Rails actually does to build that authenticity token that you see when you go to your Rails app.
What version of Rails did you do this with?
2.3.5.
Thanks. Okay, so going on to once now that we have this token, we've logged in and everything, and our futures are, we're going to do requests to, get data, to get the alerts list and everything and that. So we set it up so that all in our application controller, that all of our requests are going to fulfill these required headers. So we built them right up in there. Every time any one of the controllers was hit, you know, this would be kicked off from this statement before filter only on options, and it would preset all these headers. So that was sort of ready-made process. And of course, whenever there was an options request, it would return just true with a status of 200 success. So here we go. We got some real live requests. We got a surge of people, and it's a post. And let's see. The real important point here is that before we captured this cookie, this token. Now, every time before we make a request and have it successful, is we're going to have to pre-send, set up a header, request header with that cookie. And this is just from the local memory.
And we attach that to the document, right? The cookie.
The cookie we stuck into window local storage.
Right.
There's some document tricks that we use for some other data, but I'll get to that.
That was another thing that we won't go probably too much into, that we did have difficulties between browsers and that, who still really had session storage, local storage, and database storage all actively working.
Between iOS versions.
And
with different iOS versions.
yes, very, yeah. So, and as you noticed, there were times when, even though we stayed a lot of the time in Safari, because that's the browser that's on your phone, sometimes it doesn't succeed, you know, at seeing things, you know, as the options. So we had to revert to always our handy Firebug. A little faded out, but this is suggesting network status critical of handling network user reachability API. But this is actually where you can take over.
Sure.
Yeah. Here, okay. I can stop sweating.
So they had done a lot of groundwork when I came to the company. Yeah, good job, Rich. Thank you.
Thank you.
So a big part of what I did was really the cleanup and try to get the thing friendly for people to use. But there was a lot of other catches. One was, like you mentioned, when you're on a mobile device, especially when you're in a browser on a mobile device, there's very little information about what just went wrong network-wise. So as he mentioned, the jQtouch framework has some pretty good hooks into the system that allow you to check, is the wireless on, am I on a server, and so forth. So that was really important, again, for the Apple requirements. I'm not going to recommend that you guys use jQtouch, although there are a couple reasons why you might, and I'll discuss them later. But one of the reasons not to is that it's glued to an older version of jQuery, and that has issues, specifically with when you make your AJAX requests. It doesn't. It always says success, even on a failure, and so you have to kind of specifically check the state of your connection and make sure that your response codes are it's a mess. Anyway, that was a catch. I guess I already touched that one. So just a couple of general guidelines for when building an iPhone app in a web browser. And I don't know if we specifically mentioned the process that you use in jQuery and many other of these mobile frameworks is you're essentially to avoid the ability to avoid the pitfall of grabbing a fresh page and just rendering the page as an app, which we believe and have seen evidence that Apple will reject, because then what they've approved as an application can quickly and easily change as fast as you can change your website. Instead, you're basically pulling divs, shifting divs around, or occasionally switching local pages, and then via the AJAX request, just grabbing data and JavaScript populating your fields. So jQtouch was the way that we accomplished that, but it is more or less dead, and it was dead by the time I got on the project. When they started the project, it probably, I think it was the best choice, but this whole idea of mobile-friendly web environment, or tools for the web is really blowing up right now. There's a lot of new tools out there, and the guy with jQtouch has moved on to some other things. Documentation sucked.
Would you recommend anything else?
Yes, and I have some suggestions coming up. One of the big issues that you'll run into, and I think every library has to address this, is the way the iPhone handles taps within the browser. If you have an iPhone, you know you double tap on something and it zooms to zoom to that area. It's very friendly and handy. But one of the big drawbacks is when you're using an app, you don't want zooming typically, and you don't want it to wait for that second tap. And so a lot of times you tap on something and it makes a second before the app responds. One of the ways around that was they implemented their own tap event, which is pretty clever, and there was a whole lot of work that went into it, but it was still kind of buggy. And I've looked into how some of the other frameworks do it, and they're taking similar approaches, but I can't report on their success because I haven't had a chance to dig into them. But what it did was it ended up in a lot of cases firing two events, their event as well as the actual click event, which led to all kinds of history issues. Because it's keeping a local history so that your JavaScript back buttons work nicely. But when you go to the same page twice with only one real event, it's a mess. So this is another tip that I can give you, and that is, this was the only way we could find for the iPhone to hang on to a piece of data across iOS 3 and iOS 4. We messed around with a lot of local, other kinds of local store with SQLite, a couple other functions, but there may be others. This is the only one we could find, was to stuff it into Window Local Store, and you can retrieve that after the browser dies. You can even retrieve that after the phone resets, which is interesting. But we were able to reproduce that on both iOS 3 and 4. Secondly, because we are not actually calling new pages, but we're just jumping from div to div and repopulating, it became tiresome to try to stringify everything, to pass it and unstringify it. It was kind of a mess until we realized you could just, and if you use jQuery and other languages have their own similar way of simply tacking data onto an object, or onto a div element, effectively, then you can store objects. And so this came in handy if you go to a search pane, you just tack your search results right onto the pane itself within the DOM, kind of within the DOM. Then when you come back to the search pane, you don't have to call new results because it's still there. So those are just two tips that made things a whole lot smoother and easier for us on the phone.
Could you look into what the size limitations of how much data you could store?
I think it's 5 megabytes.
Is it
by
5?
default.
Okay. Yeah. If you're only developing for iOS 4, you have many more options in terms of local storage, because it's full HTML5 and it's going to have, all the fun and goodies that come with that. But our requirements were for a company or an organization that had already deployed many older iPhones, and so we knew this had to work on iOS 3 as well.
You typically only really want to store what's visible, so what's actually visible is minimal content compared to what you may have fetched.
And then this is just if you have an iPhone, you probably know it, but the
Spinning wheel.
The spinning wheel, or the slot machine thing
Yeah.
they use to make select lists. One of our lists is a list of all the jurisdictions in Texas, and that's a pain. Some of the newer JavaScript libraries or frameworks are handling that with this custom widget, which is a lot more nice. So then, just to sort of summarize, because we'll give a little demo of the app in a sec, but some of the things we might do differently if we were starting today. Rails performed great with some tweaks and some pushes, but it was flexible enough to let us do the things we needed to do with Rails. One tip you might make if you're doing something like this, we tied a lot of our stuff to the format.json default renderer, but later on we realized that if you do a quick alias, it's going to clean things up a lot for you, because you don't have to rely on it. All right, sorry. And then here are the alternatives. Currently, jQtouch is probably the leader if you're looking for a great iPhone environment. It looks and feels just like an iPhone or an iPad. It also has Android compatibility, but it's going to make your Android look like an iPhone. Whether you like that or not is up to you.
It's not open source for commercial licensing.
It is not
unlike
open
what
source.
jQtouch was.
Right, that was one of the advantages of jQtouch. It's MIT licensed. You can do what the heck you want with it. They don't offer such a license, but their licensing is pretty cheap, really. So, if it's a deal breaker, it shouldn't be a deal breaker for anybody. This is what jQtouch has become. The developer took his code and went to EXT, so that's what that is. jQuery Mobile just came out a couple weeks ago. A little rough, especially on some of the different devices besides the main 2 or 3. But it works, and it works on a lot more devices reliably, just slower. And it also looks a lot more generic, so you're not going to look like you're forcing the iPhone UI on people. Of course, all of it's themable, but it's it's how much effort you want to take. Oh, I forgot to add a little bit. JoApp just noticed it 2 days ago. It's just joapp.com. And again, it's very much like jQuery Mobile, fairly generic, fairly new, but it looks very promising and it supports a lot of devices. And finally, if this was a requirement for us that it be in the App Store, but if we were to restart today, we might look more seriously at that requirement and talk with the client a bit more about whether it would be best served, after all, just straight off the web, so that it would be accessible to more devices. And I guess with that, Chris is going to do a quick demonstration of the app. One of the nice things about the jQtouch and a lot of the other libraries is that that effect you just saw, which sort of feels like a native iPhone effect, is in fact fully CSS and JavaScript.
The phone likes it. I have to make settings, change the setting maybe. Galileo! Maybe I should have changed my email address.
And just so you know, Tahoe is also a very risque anime character.
But yeah, we are, the company's conservative.
We're doing battle for #1 on Google right now.
So this is, and this would be, like for instance, we could click on, okay.
You get server slowness? And try a different one.
Yeah.
Or it could fail.
Oh well, maybe we won't show that.
Try hitting refresh.
We're running into Wi-Fi.
Hey.
Good error handling.
There's our error handling.
Was it working last night?
Yeah. Are you connecting to localhost or to the server? Do you know if you're connecting to your own system or to the server?
Oh, refresh this time.
Oh, okay.
No, I think it's still going on. Did it refresh this time?
Well,
Oh well.
go to people, I guess.
Yeah, the other point here is to, this won't even work either too. Oh yeah, here we go. We pull it down, and this is our scheme to do pagination. We get more alerts by off scrolling to the bottom.
Maybe it is running off the local. Oh,
But it works.
Yeah, trust us, it
We
works.
promise.
And then people search.
You notice the pane, if that's just another div, it's not like a new page.
Yeah, those are just your, I know my own name. And,
You can just click go, actually.
yeah, I could.
Not likely that would work though.
There you go. But,
Maybe the alerts are just.
I want wanted to show that spinning wheel if they're interested in.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
This is we got, how many, 100, 200 jurisdictions?
The counties.
Mm-hmm.
There are counties, districts, so on and so forth. And the spinning wheel is not, this is the standard Apple thing, but it's a miserable interface for anything that large. I guess I could have chosen something like Bell. I know that I'm in Bell. There we go.
So that swipe right there, that was jQtouch?
Yeah, yeah. All the effects you're seeing, and a couple other things that I can't remember now are.
Well, it's like
these UI elements are handled by, native to jQtouch. Things like buttons, the effects, even the little rounded corners and the nice sort of iPhone-y list. There's a lot to love with jQtouch. It's just that it's abandoned, and so it was really hard to find documentation when you run into a problem. Most of the time, it's just sort of shrugged. Well, that's a problem.
Fortunately, these guys figured it all out for you. You can look at the project.
There you go.
there you go. Got the first one. Apparently it was a network thing.
What are you using Ruby for?
On the phone, there's no Ruby. It's communicating entirely with the Ruby on Rails backend. So all the data is being served in Ruby over JSON.
Yeah, so our original application was a Ruby on Rails app. So rather than writing a whole other thing that hooks into the same database, we're just using basically format.json.
Oh, I thought you were putting a local server.
PhoneGap puts a local server on it, but it's only just HTML5 pages with JavaScript.
And then you fetch the data, merge it in into the div, and then you present it.
It's all fetched with JSON.
So there's no like functional requirements that would lead you to want to put something in the App Store. It's more just to have it in the App Store.
When we initially brought up the idea of having this application, DSH has specifically said we want it in the App Store, or else it's not worth having. So that was a functional requirement of what we needed.
Okay.
So,
But there's nothing you couldn't have gotten out of just doing it as a Safari.
No, and we wouldn't have had to use cores potentially. We could have just launched our application as a web application, just stripped out, gotten rid of some of the headache and hassle. But because we wanted to not get rejected, and we wanted it to all be there on the phone, look through the code, say here's all your CSS, here's all your JS. We're not pulling any extra CSS or JS in. The application exists completely on the phone except for that data.
But note, you can actually do that now if you use a manifest file. It's HTML5, which is supported on the later versions of the iPhone. You can actually tell it to store all the CSS, images, JavaScript, everything offline on the phone. When you install it as a home screen icon, then you hit it, everything comes up, and you can go, oh, I don't have a network connection, or whatever. But everything can be stored on the phone, actually. It's pretty cool.
Any other questions? I guess it's a good time for questions.
Yeah, we're pretty much
We're done.
after the question time anyway. So thank you. So bathroom break, hang out, find a person you know, talk to them. Find a person you don't know, talk to them.
This is called iMockups. Oh yeah. Heard of it, haven't used it. So you can do like web or iPhone, right? Yeah, I mean it's not as full featured as most of them. It's got a good amount of shit. Like I had all the icons and all that too.
I've been waiting to see I've kind of been to all the meetings I think you have.
Video?
No, I wasn't.
Thanks for